You need to twist that tighter if it's going to hold the tension.
I'm trying, it's old wire.
Caroline Fletcher stood with her carpet bag and her last shred of pride. The wind carried whispers through the town, whispers about her, about desperation, about a woman alone in a place that didn't forgive such things. She'd come from St. Louis with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of foolish notions. The telegram had been clear. Housekeeper needed. Wages generous. Inquire at the Thornton Ranch. But Caroline Fletcher hadn't come for the wages. She'd come for him. James Thornton owned half the territory, or so the stories went. Cattle baron, silver mine investor, a man whose shadow stretched as far as his fortune. She'd seen his photograph in a society column back east. Strong jaw, eyes like flint. The kind of man who commanded respect without asking for it. The kind of man who could give a woman security, status, as everything she'd lost when her father's debts had swallowed their world whole. Caroline smoothed her travel-worn dress and approached the mercantile where she was meant to meet the ranch foreman. Her reflection in the window glass showed a woman trying to look dignified while the desert ate away at everything soft. Dark hair escaping its pins, green eyes too bright with ambition, 24 years old and already playing a dangerous game. You the woman from St. Louis? She turned to find a weathered man with a gray mustache studying her like she was livestock at auction. His eyes held no romance, only assessment. I am. Caroline Fletcher. I'm here about the housekeeping position. Silas Webb, foreman. He spat tobacco juice into the street. You ever work a ranch before, Miss Fletcher? I managed a household staff of 6 in St. Louis. The lie came smooth as silk. Silas's expression suggested he'd heard better lies from worse liars. This ain't St. Louis. Ranch house sits 10 miles out. Nearest neighbor's 5 miles past that. Mr. Thornton's particular about his privacy. You'll be cooking, cleaning, mending, dawn to dusk, sometimes past dusk. I understand. Do you? His eyes narrowed. We get women out here sometimes. Women with notions. Mr. Thornton ain't interested in notions. He's got a ranch to run. Heat crawled up Caroline's neck, but she held his gaze. I'm here to work, Mr. Webb. Nothing more. Another assessment. Another spray of tobacco juice. Wagon leaves in an hour. Be ready. The ride to the Thornton Ranch took them through country so vast and empty it made Caroline's chest ache. Some mountains rose like broken teeth against a sky going purple with evening. The land stretched endlessly, swallowing sound, swallowing hope, swallowing the small dreams of a woman who'd thought she could seduce security out of a stranger. The ranch house appeared as the last light bled from the horizon. It wasn't the mansion Caroline had imagined. 2 stories of rough-hewn timber and stone, built to withstand this brutal country rather than impress it. Corrals and outbuildings scattered around it like satellites. Somewhere in the gathering dark, cattle lowed. Mr. Thornton's in the study, Silas said as he hauled her bag onto the porch. Wants to meet you before you settle in. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she'd rehearsed 100 times. She'd smile just so, let her hand linger when they shook. Make him see her not as a housekeeper, but as a woman who could be more. The study door stood ajar, lamplight spilling across worn floorboards. Caroline paused at the threshold, smoothing her hair, pressing her lips together to bring color to them. Come in, Miss Fletcher. The voice was deeper than she'd expected, rougher. She stepped inside and found him standing at the window, silhouetted against the last gasp of daylight. James Thornton turned to face her, and every calculated word fled her mind. The photograph hadn't captured this, the width of his shoulders, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind, the way he moved with the careful economy of a man who'd learned to conserve energy in an unforgiving land. And he was older than she'd thought, perhaps 40, with silver threading through dark hair and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. Mr. Thornton, she managed the words. managed not to stare. "Miss Fletcher?" He didn't offer his hand. "Silas tells me you're from St. Louis?" "Yes, sir." "Long way to come for a housekeeping job." His eyes, gray as gunmetal, held hers without warmth. "What are you running from?" The directness stole her breath. "I'm not running, Mr. Thornton. I'm seeking opportunity." "In Dry Creek?" Something flickered in his expression, not quite amusement. "You must be desperate indeed." "I'm practical. I need work. You need a housekeeper." He moved to the desk, poured whiskey into a glass with steady hands. "I've had 3 housekeepers in 2 years, Miss Fletcher. The isolation breaks them, and the work breaks them, or they develop expectations. That can't be met." He didn't drink, just held the glass and watched her. "Which will it be with you?" Caroline lifted her chin. "None of the above, Mr. Thornton. I'll do the work I'm hired for. Nothing more, nothing less." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. "We'll see." He set down the glass. "Your quarters are off the kitchen. Breakfast is at 5. I take coffee black, eggs over easy, biscuits if you can manage them. I'll be gone most days from dawn to dusk. When I'm here, I expect quiet. I expect privacy. I expect competence. Can you provide those things?" "Yes, sir." "Then we'll try it for a month. After that, we'll see if Dry Creek has broken you yet." He dismissed her with a nod, already turning back to the window, to the darkness gathering over his land like a living thing. Caroline found her way to the small room off the kitchen, closed the door, and sat on the narrow bed with her heart still racing. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Where was the charm, the opportunity, the chance to make him see her? Instead, she'd found a man armored in solitude, a man who looked at her and saw not a woman, but another problem to manage. She unpinned her hair and let it fall around her shoulders. Through the thin wall, she could hear him moving in the study, the creak of a chair, the splash of more whiskey being poured. Caroline Fletcher had come to Dry Creek with a plan. Seduce the rich cowboy, secure her future, simple. But nothing about James Thornton was simple, and the desert night pressed against the windows like a warning she should have heeded long before now. 3 weeks passed like water through clenched fingers. Caroline learned the rhythms of the ranch house, learned that James Thornton took his coffee before the sun rose, that he returned smelling of leather and sweat and distances she couldn't fathom. Learned that he spoke rarely, ate in silence, and disappeared into his study each night with ledgers and loneliness for company. She learned that wanting a man and knowing a man were different things entirely. The work was harder than anything she'd imagined. Her hands, once soft, grew rough from lye soap and cast iron. Her back ached from hauling water, scrubbing floors, beating dust from rugs that seemed to generate it faster than she could clean. The isolation pressed against her like a physical thing, nothing but wind and distance, and the occasional cowhand passing through with mud on his boots and hunger in his eyes. But it was the silence that unraveled her most. James Thornton spoke to her in instructions. The stove needs more wood. Coffee's weak. Fence crew's coming Thursday, needs feeding. Never a personal word, never a question. He looked through her like she was furniture, and something in Caroline, something proud and desperate and dangerously foolish, couldn't bear it. She started small, a touch longer than necessary when passing his coffee, standing in doorways where lamplight would catch her profile, letting her sleeve slip to reveal the curve of her shoulder. Small things, calculated things, things he ignored completely. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks and 4 days after her arrival. Storm clouds had been building all afternoon, turning the sky the color of a bruise. Caroline was mending one of his shirts when James came in early, rain-soaked and furious about something she didn't understand. "Mr. Thornton?" She stood quickly, setting aside her sewing. "I'll get you a towel." "Leave it." He pulled off his hat, water streaming from its brim. His shirt clung to his shoulders, and Caroline's mouth went dry. "You're soaked through. At least let me—" "I said leave it, Miss Fletcher." The sharpness in his tone should have stopped her, should have sent her back to the kitchen where she belonged. Instead, she stepped closer, heart hammering, hand already reaching for his arm. "I'm only trying to help." He caught her wrist mid-reach, not roughly, but firm enough that she gasped. And his eyes, gray as the storm outside, finally, truly looked at her. "No," he said quietly, "you're not." The words hung between them like an accusation. Caroline's face burned. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" He released her wrist, stepped back, put careful distance between them. "I've been watching you, Miss Fletcher. The way you move, the way you look at me, the small touches, the lingering glances." His voice held no anger, only a terrible weariness. "I told you on your first day I wasn't interested in expectations. Did you think I was bluffing?" Shame flooded through her, hot and sick. "Mr. Thornton, You came here thinking what? That you'd charm your way into my bed? Into my bank account?" He moved to the window, shoulders tight. "You wouldn't be the first woman to try. You won't be the last. That's not—" But the lie died on her tongue because it was exactly that, and they both knew it. Thunder rolled across the range, shaking the windows. James Thornton stood silhouetted against the storm, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, sadder. "I had a wife once, Sarah. She was everything good I didn't deserve. We built this place together, her and me. Raised cattle, fought drought, fought the land itself." He touched the window glass like he could reach through it to some distant memory. "She died 4 years ago. Fever took her in 3 days. I buried her on the ridge where she used to watch the sunset." Caroline's throat closed. "Since then, I've had women come through here with all kinds of notions. Women who saw a lonely widower with money. Women who thought they could replace her. Fill whatever hole she left." He turned to face Caroline, and his expression held no malice, only exhaustion. "But Sarah can't be replaced, Miss Fletcher, and I'm not looking for someone to try." The truth of it settled over Caroline like dust. She'd been so focused on what she wanted, security, status, escape from her own failures, that she'd never once considered him as a person, as a man still grieving, still bleeding from a loss 4 years couldn't heal. "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate. I didn't understand." "No, you didn't." He moved toward the study, paused at the threshold. "You're a good housekeeper, Miss Fletcher. Better than the last 3. If you can be content with that, with honest work for honest wages, you're welcome to stay. But if you came here looking for anything more, you should leave before the month is out, before you waste any more of your time or mine." He closed the study door, leaving Caroline alone with the storm and her shame. She stood there as rain hammered the roof, as lightning split the darkening sky. She'd come to Dry Creek chasing a fantasy, the rich cowboy, the easy answer, the simple solution to complicated problems. She'd seen James Thornton as a means to an end, not as a man with his own scars, his own losses, his own right to privacy and peace. The realization broke something in her, something that needed breaking. Caroline walked to her small room and sat on the narrow bed. Through the wall, she could hear nothing from the study. No movement, no sound, just the silence of a man alone with his grief. She could leave, pack her carpetbag, catch the next wagon to town. I'd disappear back into whatever came next. It would be easier than staying, easier than facing what she'd done. But something had shifted in her during those 3 weeks. Something had changed in the rhythm of hard work, in the discipline of service, in the strange peace of this brutal, beautiful country. Caroline Fletcher had come to Dry Creek for the wrong reasons, but maybe Maybe she could find a right reason to stay. The storm passed before morning, leaving the land washed clean and smelling of sage. Caroline woke before dawn, as she had every day for the past month, and started the coffee. Her hands moved through familiar tasks, grinding beans, stoking the stove, mixing biscuit dough, while her mind churned with decision. She heard James Thornton's boots on the stairs, heard him pause at the kitchen door. Coffee's ready," she said without turning. "Biscuits will be done in 10 minutes. Silence. Then, "Thank you, Miss Fletcher." He didn't sit. She heard him pour coffee, heard him move toward the door. "Mr. Thornton?" She turned to face him, flour on her hands, resolution in her spine. "I'm staying, if the offer still stands." His expression was unreadable in the pre-dawn shadows. For the right reasons this time? For honest work. She met his eyes without flinching. For honest wages. Nothing more. Something eased in his shoulders. Not quite trust, but the beginning of it. "All right, then." He left for the range as the sun broke over the eastern ridge, and Caroline pulled biscuits from the oven and allowed herself to breathe. The days that followed were different. Not in any obvious way. The work was still hard, and the isolation still pressed close. James Thornton still spoke in careful distances, but Caroline approached it all differently now. She stopped performing, stopped calculating. She simply worked. She learned to bake bread that didn't crumble, learned to mend fence wire and gentle spooked horses, learned the names of the ranch hands, Miguel with his gap-toothed smile, old Tom who'd ridden with Thornton for 20 years, young Jesse who blushed whenever she looked his way. She learned that the land, for all its harshness, had a terrible beauty. Sunsets that painted the mountains gold, storms that rolled across the range like God's own cavalry, stars so thick and bright they seemed close enough to touch. She learned that honest work had its own kind of dignity. James noticed the change. As she saw it in small ways, a nod of approval when the coffee was right, a quiet good when she'd managed to organize his chaotic ledgers, a thank you that held actual warmth. He started talking to her, not in instructions but in conversations, about the cattle market, about the drought threatening to the south, about the mountain lion that had been taking calves and how they'd need to track it before losses mounted. One evening, 6 weeks after the storm, Caroline was clearing dinner dishes when James spoke from the doorway. "Would you like to see her grave?" She turned, uncertain. "Sir?" "Sarah's." He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly. "You asked once about the ridge. I thought, if you're going to stay, you should know." They rode out in the long light of evening, James on his bay gelding, the Caroline on the gentle mare he'd saddled for her. The ridge rose above the ranch house, a rocky spine that caught the last of the sun. At its crest, beneath a weathered cottonwood, stood a simple marker. Sarah Thornton, beloved wife, 1856 to 1885. "She used to come up here every evening," James said quietly. "Said she could see forever from this spot. Said it made her feel small and big at the same time." He touched the marker, fingers gentle on weathered wood. "I couldn't save her. Rode 2 days for a doctor, but by the time we got back," his voice fractured. "This land takes everything eventually. Everyone." Caroline dismounted, stood beside him, not touching, just present. "Tell me about her." So he did. Haltingly at first, then with gathering warmth, stories of a woman who'd been tougher than the country that killed her. Who'd laughed in the face of drought and debt. Who'd loved James Thornton with a fierceness that still echoed in every word he spoke. "She sounds remarkable," Caroline said when he finished. She was. James looked out over the darkening range. "I'm not looking to replace her, Miss Fletcher. I need you to understand that. Even if I wanted to, and I'm not saying I do, no one could fill that hole. I understand. And she did. Finally, truly did. I'm not trying to anymore. He looked at her then, really looked, like he had that night in the storm. But this time, what he saw seemed to surprise him. What are you trying to do? Caroline considered the question, considered the woman she'd been 6 weeks ago, desperate and scheming. Considered the woman she was becoming in this hard country, under this vast sky. Yeah, build something, she said finally. Not with you, not at you, just for myself. Something honest. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close. That's a good reason to stay. They rode back as stars began to prick the deepening blue. At the house, James helped her down from the mare, his hand steady on her waist. He released her quickly, properly, but something had shifted between them. Some wall had lowered, just slightly. "Thank you for showing me," Caroline said. "Thank you for asking." The weeks turned to months. Summer deepened, then gave way to autumn's gold. Caroline's hands grew strong, her shoulders steady. She learned to read the land's moods, to anticipate the ranch's needs. She learned that James Thornton, for all his silence, had a dry humor that surfaced unexpectedly, and that he played chess with fierce concentration, that he read poetry late at night when he thought no one could hear. She learned that loneliness and solitude were different things, and that she was learning to tell them apart. And James learned that Caroline Fletcher wasn't the woman who'd arrived desperate and calculating. She'd been refined by this place the way silver was refined by fire. Made pure. Made true. One evening in late October, with the first snow dusting the high peaks, they sat on the porch after dinner. It had become a habit, this quiet companionship. No expectations, no designs, just two people watching darkness claim the land. "I misjudged you," James said suddenly. Caroline looked at him, surprised. "Sir? When you first arrived, I thought you were like the others. Out for what you could get." He turned to face her, and in the lamplight from the window his eyes held something new, something like respect. "But you stayed. You did the work. You became part of this place." "It became part of me," Caroline said honestly. "I see that." He was quiet a moment then. "I'm not ready, Miss Fletcher. I need you to know that. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for anything beyond what we have now." Her heart quickened, but not with the grasping desperation she'd felt months ago. This was different, softer, more patient. "I'm not asking for ready," she said. "I'm just asking for honest. Then I'll tell you honestly, I value you, your work, your presence, you." He stumbled over the words like a man learning a new language. "If that changes someday, if it becomes more, I'll tell you. But I can't promise it will." "I'm not asking for promises either." Caroline smiled, and it reached all the way to her eyes. "I'm asking for today, for honest work, for this." She gestured to the land stretching endlessly before them, to the life she'd built here. One biscuit, one mended fence, one hard-earned sunrise at a time. James reached out slowly, gave her hand a brief squeeze. "All right then, today." They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged overhead. Somewhere on the range, cattle lowed. A coyote called to the rising moon. The wind carried the scent of coming snow. Caroline Fletcher had come to Dry Creek for all the wrong reasons, chasing security, chasing status, chasing a man she'd seen as a means to an end. But she'd found something better, something true. She'd found work that mattered, land that tested and tempered her. And in James Thornton, she'd found not a rich cowboy to seduce, but a wounded man learning to live again. Maybe someday there would be more between them. Maybe someday his heart would heal enough to let someone in. Or maybe not. Either way, Caroline Fletcher had learned this. A woman didn't need a man to save her. Sometimes she just needed honest work, good land, and the courage to become the person she was meant to be all along. The desert had tried to break her, like it broke everything soft and uncertain. Instead, it had made her whole. And as the first snow began to fall, soft flakes drifting down like forgiveness, Caroline sat beside James Thornton and felt, for the first time in her life, exactly where she belonged. The end.